From his impressive victories against Edson Barboza and Michael Chiesa to his brutal loss against Rinat Fakhretdinov, leading to his retirement. Here's why Kevin Lee needs to stay retired. We've seen how much of a skilled lightweight superstar he is. His accomplishments over the years were definitely impressive, but the real problem is, they were short-lived. Lee signed with the UFC in the welterweight division, so he worked his way up, bagging impressive wins against Edson Barboza and Michael Chiesa along the way. Even though he's only 30 years old, given his career, you'd think he was a full-fledged all-time fighter. Even Georges St-Pierre said Kevin doesn't realize how good he was, or at least when he used to have his versatile skill set. But then came his downfall. His most anticipated UFC debut didn't exactly go as planned. He was supposed to fight Ali Iaquinta, who was worse off than Kevin ever could be. He was older, had already lost 2 of his previous fights, and according to many commentators and sports analysts, didn't have that natural fighting talent. On the flip side, Lee was undefeated, younger, and had great adjustment skills. Luke Thomas, a famous combat sports journalist, believed Kevin to be a top prospect for this fight and his future ones. But guess what? Kevin lost, in fact. He lost by a unanimous decision. Maybe fans should have given up hope then, because if that wasn't bad enough, Lee faced another embarrassing defeat against Leonardo Santos, who was 13 years older than him. In fact, Kevin didn't even last for 3 rounds, with Santos shutting him down in 3 minutes. He actually pulled a TKO on Lee, and people in the UFC don't let a TKO slide. It really hurts their pride, and I can imagine why, but turns out that was the wake-up call Kevin needed, because he was on a victory spree after that. He won multiple fights back-to-back, restoring the fans' faith in him. He won against the seasoned Chiesa in the very first round. He went on to win against Barboza as well, but then he scheduled a rematch with Al Iaquinta. Kevin was very confident about winning. He was high on adrenaline from his consecutive wins. He even taunted the older fighter, saying he hasn't even evolved, but boo-hoo. Who actually won the fight? That's right, it was Iaquinta, yet again. It was like history repeating itself. Because Kevin lost to a unanimous decision again. Looks like that victory spree came with an expiration date, because people were talking about his loss against Tony Ferguson for days. Both of them were contenders for the UFC's lightweight division, and both of them showed great promise as well. With Kevin's resilience techniques and Tony's striking game, it wasn't easy to predict who would win. Lee had already earned a nickname for himself, Motown Phenom, in 2017. People, fans, and critics alike had high hopes for him. He had us all believing that he could win the UFC gold, but then his scheduled fight with Ferguson finally came around. Now, Tony was a competent rival for sure, but almost everyone was cheering for Lee's win. But sadly, it didn't go as expected. Tony was all about discipline and rhythm, while Kevin was struggling to simply defend himself against his attacks. You can imagine how crushing his defeat was for fans, even the critics. And while the fans lived on with hopes in their hearts, critics became wary. And then 7 years passed by just like that with no medal or gold. And after his 2-year break from the octagon, Lee resigned from UFC, probably hoping to make an epic comeback. He actually left because his contract was over and was suffering from 2 very major ACL tears in both his knees. But we all knew it had to do with his back-to-back losses against fighters that were below him. Still, Lee had the balls to come back and was promoting his return like no one's business. He made big statements, talking about reintroducing himself as if he was a changed person. And in his big rush to relaunch himself, he scheduled a fight with none other than Rinat Fakhretdinov. Since he created such hype around his return, fans were super pumped to see him in his element again. Many people were hoping this would be the new conquering era for Lee. There was one person that strongly disagreed though, and that was Fakhretdinov himself. When he defeated Kevin in the octagon within a minute, I might add, Rinat made his prediction public, saying that this is exactly what he had expected. The winner also went on to preach about his Russian customs, saying it's tradition for them not to say anything until they do it, so they do more than what they say, which is why he was keeping quiet. That sounds about right to me. How does that saying go? Empty vessels make the most noise. His promotion made his defeat all the worse. Since he got his fans so excited, they weren't just let down. They were mad. They didn't like how disappointing and short-lived his fight was, which was the final push Kevin needed, because he soon announced his retirement on Threads. At Motown Phenom, aka, Kevin posted multiple threads, sharing his thoughts on retiring and MMA in general, I believe. One of them actually said there's more to life than MMA, or fighting in general. Everyone knows it was his embarrassing defeat, even though he doesn't admit it. Following that bold statement, Lee wrote, "I'm going to retire from the UFC, but I can't find the right words to use in this video." Well, he sure had no trouble expressing his thoughts on Threads. He posted on Insta as well about his plans to retire, writing, "It's been 12 years, 12 long years of me being the best fighter that I can be, and a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication for me to try to be the best fighter in the world. When I look back on it, I had a hell of a career." He made this big claim on a fine Tuesday morning on July 18th, 2023. It was so out of the blue it sent a shockwave through the MMA community. There were so many reactions: sad, understanding, mocking, and angry. For the most part, people understood because he stopped fitting into the MMA world a while ago. A few of them pointed out how good things are waiting for him and how proud they are of Kevin for taking a step back to prioritize other things in life, like his physical and mental health. Who knows, maybe he'll find a hobby or two. The worst shock came from his fellow fighters. These are the people who fought with him. They knew how resilient he was. In fact, his stubbornness showed in some of his fights, and that's why some MMA fighters couldn't believe it. They think Kevin will be back though, while others totally understand his reason for retirement, especially after that miserable loss from Rinat. While his retirement isn't 100% confirmed, people know that after his fight with Fakhretdinov, it's best if he does. Kevin gave his best shot to MMA, winning some incredible fights, but taking his injuries and his consecutive losses into mind. Yeah, I don't blame him for cutting ties with the community. That isn't to say that he's done with his fans or no longer wants to be associated with the sport. He only said that he wants to be able to figure out his life and what he wants out of it. And people couldn't help but sympathize with him because despite his poor performance in the last few fights, he really gave his heart to this sport. Which shows how mentally and physically drained he is now. Who wouldn't be? MMA's not for the faint of heart, and sometimes even if you give it your all, it just isn't meant for you. Kevin definitely realized that, especially with his match with Fakhretdinov. In the end, all everyone had to say was good luck with your future endeavors. But they're also saddened by his departure, especially since he's only a 30-year-old MMA fighter. He can fight for many more years, but people are respecting his decision because Lee's well aware of the stakes. He understands he's no longer fit to fight, and it should remain that way. Fans know he has tried to bounce back in the past, and it didn't work out well. And so they're bidding him farewell, marking the end of an era of the Motown phenom, knowing that he could never be replaced. So from his brutal loss against Rinat Fakhretdinov leading to his retirement, to his impressive victories against Edson Barboza and Michael Chiesa, that was why Kevin Lee needs to stay retired.